Hello, Wellington. Hello, Auckland. Hello, the entire New Zealand Jewish community. What a privilege and a pleasure it is for me to share words of Torah with you. It's a pleasure to thank your rabbi, Rav Ariel and Rachel, and to thank Rav Nati for all of the wondrous work that they're doing with communities in New Zealand. You're so blessed to have these rabbis, and may they continue to be a light unto your communities, and may you continue to inspire them to do wondrous things for you. My name is Rabbi Dr. Kenneth Brander. I am the president and Rosh Yeshiva, the head of Or Torah Stone. Or Torah Stone is a group of 27 Jewish institutions that works with 5,000 students a year in our schools, interacts with around 400,000 Israelis who are searching to learn a little bit more about their Jewish identity. Many of our students, at least around 800 at a time, are also serving in the Israeli Defense Forces, particularly in the Shmona Matayim, in the special intelligence units, as well as in commando and combat units. We have the opportunity to visit many of them on a regular basis. And then we also interact with thousands, tens of thousands of Jews throughout the world through your wonderful rabbis, through our students, our Baron Amiel and Strauss Amiel emissaries, around 300 of them currently around the world. And we deal with other issues like trying to ensure that Judaism celebrates a full understanding of treating all with respect, which is what Judaism represents. V'ahavta l'recha kamocha, love thy neighbor as you love yourself. And therefore we work every single year with approximately 600 plus agunot, women who are having difficulty getting a Jewish divorce because of recalcitrant spouses. And we work to aid them. We are the only institution in Israel that works internationally. And we have women who have been trained to be lawyers in front of rabbinical courts. They're lawyers by profession also. And the Israeli rabbinate has signed off that these women can represent women in the rabbinical court system. Not a simple thing to have achieved, but thank God we're achieving it. And so you're part of the Or Torah Stone family. If you're being inspired by Rav Ariel, by Rav Nati, by Rachel, you're part of our family. So it's a pleasure to be able to share words of Torah with you. I wanted to talk to you about the Holiday of Shavuot and share with you 3 questions and perhaps come up with some answers. And I'd love to hear what you think about my answers. The first question is, the Holiday of Shavuot, the holiday in which we receive the Torah. There's not one particular commandment that were legislated to celebrate on this holiday. Yes, many of us will eat cheesecake on this holiday, but cheesecake, contrary to popular belief, is not said in the Bible, thou must eat dairy on the holiday of Shavuot. Unlike Passover, which has so many commandments attached to it, unlike the holiday, for example, of Sukkot that has so many commandments attached to it, the holiday of Shavuot has none. Why is that? The holiday in which we receive the Torah has no commandment to celebrate it? Second question. The holiday of Shavuot, the date for the holiday of Shavuot, is not written in the Torah. We're actually told the following, that you should count 50 days, count 50 days from the second day of Passover, and that's the holiday of Shavuot. Why is it choreographed in this fashion? Why don't they tell us it's on this and this day in the month of Sivan? Why does it tell us it's 50 days from Passover? And the third question is, the holiday of Shavuot celebrates the receiving of the Torah on Mount Sinai, this major historical event where God reveals himself with great clarity to the entire Jewish people, indeed to the entire world community. Yet, it is clear that while this is an unprecedented historical event that never occurred again, the mountain of Sinai is not at the present time holy. One can ascend the mountain. One can, decide that they want to take a hike and go up Jabal Musar, Moses' mountain, as it's called in Arabic, with no prohibition whatsoever, even though God clearly revealed himself on that mountain in an unprecedented way. However, the Temple Mount, which we know is holy, God never revealed himself the way he reveals himself on Mount Sinai. And even though the event, when it comes to the temple, has ended, the holiness of the location still is maintained. Unlike Mount Sinai, where the holiness of the location is no longer sustained. Why is it that Mount Sinai, where God reveals himself in the clearest way, unprecedented even within the temple, no longer has holiness, when the temple, even though God did not reveal himself with any clarity like he did on Mount Sinai, has holiness even 2,000 years after the event? I'd like to suggest the following answers. First of all, the holiday of Shavuot celebrates the receiving of the Torah. The true celebration of Torah, the true ideals of holiness, is not found when we're in the synagogue. It's not found when we're studying, whether it's Bible or Talmud or Jewish philosophy or Jewish law. The true ideals of Jewish holiness is found in our engagement with the day-to-day. When I engage my neighbor with respect, I'm celebrating the values of Torah. My relationship with God is critical, but part of that relationship is how I deal with the other, how I deal with somebody else. V'ahavta l'recha kamocha. Love thy neighbor, love any person as you would love yourself. For Judaism, holiness is rooted in the mundane, in the everyday. Without the everyday, there is no need for holiness. And without holiness, the everyday really has no purpose. So there is this sacred synergy between the everyday and the norms and mores of Judaism. And therefore, the way we celebrate Shavuot is we take a moment in time to think about this unbelievable experience of receiving the Torah. But there's no particular commandment because our relationship with God is not limited or restricted to a particular commandment. It's the way we engage in the everyday. It's how the values of Judaism affect my Weltanschauung, my gestalt on life. That is truly the ideals of what the holiday of Shavuot is about. The capacity for us as Jews, for us as human beings, to infuse the everyday with purpose and with meaning, to recognize what is important and what is inconsequential. The holiday of Shavuot. And therefore, the holiday of Shavuot, even though we can easily have a date within the Torah of exactly what day it is in the month of Sivan, it is the responsibility for the human being to count, to actively count. It's not enough to think. Sfirat Omer, the counting of the Omer, requires us to articulate, to accentuate the count. Because Shavuot is about the march from the physical redemption on Pesach to the spiritual redemption of the Jewish people on Shavuot. It's a march that we all have to be engaged in, because the movement from physical salvation to spiritual salvation is something we have to work at. It's something that requires our active mindset. And therefore, the holiday of Shavuot is celebrated by counting the 49 days from the second day of Passover until we reach Shavuot, accentuating the idea, the critical message, that we can only move from a physical to a spiritual salvation if we put in the time, if we put in the energy. If we ask ourselves during this counting, how are we infusing our lives with purpose? How are we making sure that our relationships with our children and our grandchildren are deep and important? How are we making sure that our relationships with our spouses are meaningful and significant? How are we making sure that our relationships with our neighbors, our fellow congregants, have significance? How are we making sure that we can have a romantic rendezvous with God? That is all part of the questions that requires us to count, to accentuate, to highlight the movement from Passover, from Pesach, to the Holiday of Shavuot. And finally, the interesting component about this wondrous Holiday of Shavuot is it teaches us another message. Mount Sinai and its holiness was created by God. It was an experience of thunder and lightning, a sound and light show that was unbelievable. It's created by God. And therefore, when God left the mountain, so did the holiness. Mount Sinai was holy for a short, brief moment in time when the Jewish people received at least some of the commandments on the mountain. But when it comes to the Temple Mount, when it comes to the Beit HaMikdash, when it comes to the Western Wall, it is not just God who's investing holiness into the activity. It's the human initiative. It's the human creativity. Each and every Jew, each and every person, many people, even non-Jews, were involved with building the temple. And therefore, holiness that is created in partnership between God and humankind is a holiness that endures forever. It's a eternal, immortal holiness. And therefore, the Beit HaMikdash, the Temple Mount, the Kotel, which was holiness that was contributed not just by God, but by human initiative. That's a holiness that remains forever. It highlights the power and the creativity of humankind. We can change the world around us. We have the capacity to make a difference. Look at all the wondrous healthcare workers during this time of Corona. Look at the important pastoral work that your rabbis are doing. Look at the work that is happening by first responders. They literally change the world. They infuse their lives with meaning, and they inspire and empower and protect all of us. And so the difference between Mount Sinai, which is a holiness just created by God, that's a temporary holiness. But the holiness that is created in partnership between God and the Jewish people, that's a holiness that remains for 2,000 years, even after the event. The holiness that is created in your congregations because of your activities is a holiness that is far greater than the holiness of Mount Sinai. It's a holiness that endures for generations because it celebrates not just the fact that you have God's presence there through the ark and through other components of the synagogue, but perhaps even more important, it's because of your dedication. It's because of your commitment. It's because of your blood, sweat, and tears that endows your synagogues with holiness forever. The Holiday of Shavuot, it reminds us of the responsibility to celebrate holiness in the everyday, and therefore there's no particular commandment because you can't limit or in some ways compartmentalize what the Holiday of Shavuot is all about. The Holiday of Shavuot, which requires accounting, which is so significant that the Torah tells us that Shavuot is 50 days from the holiday of Passover, 50 days that you and I need to count as we try to make our lives more meaningful. And the holiday of Shavuot may celebrate the Sinai experience, But the true experience that connects us to God is found in the institutions that we build in partnership with God. Institutions like the synagogue, institutions like our schools, institutions like the temple, institutions like the Western Wall. So I want to wish you all a happy Shavuot. I'd love to hear from you. My email is president, president, at ots.org.il. Again, president at ots.org.il. I'd love to hear from you. Email me. You have any questions? You want me to do this again? It would really be my pleasure. Wishing you a happy holiday. And again, it's a pleasure to be able to study Torah with you throughout New Zealand. Take care.